Beneath the swirling glow of a distant star, the Great Hall of the Galactic Union stood like a monumental jewel set in the emptiness of space. Its vast dome of translucent crystal shimmered with refracted starlight, creating a soft mosaic of rainbow hues dancing across the polished floor. Representatives of countless species filled the amphitheater-style seating, each platform elevated at varying heights that reflected status, tradition, or biology. Despite their differences in form, whether feathered, scaled, chitinous, or smooth-skinned, they all shared a single, palpable tension that rippled through the hall. At the center of the floor, upon a raised dais of obsidian, Chancellor Caden Mwyrar stood with his back straight, wearing a simple dark uniform that contrasted sharply with the ornate robes and ceremonial garments around him. Where others wore gilded sashes or elaborate headdresses, Mwyrar presented only the understated insignia of Earth's Terran Defense Council on his left sleeve. His dark eyes were keen, scanning the chamber with equal measures of caution and resolve. He knew precisely why so many delegates had convened here on such short notice. This was no ordinary assembly. It was a tribunal in all but name, and humanity stood in the crosshairs. He could sense the uneasy murmur of 1,000 alien tongues as they discussed his presence. Some of those voices were filled with anger, others with something akin to curiosity. Yet beneath it all, there was a collective undercurrent of apprehension. Rumors about humankind's brutal efficiency in warfare had spread across the galaxy. Many in attendance wanted humanity gone from the Union, expelled, if not outright quarantined. Only a minority dared to speak on humanity's behalf, recalling times when humans had intervened and saved entire star systems from annihilation. The hush fell abruptly when High Speaker Illerban raised a slender hand. She was tall and willowy, her silver-gray features reflecting an ancient lineage among the Vorkari. The lines of her face spoke of centuries of leadership, her pale eyes flicking between Mwyrar and the other delegates. Her presence had always evoked calm, until now. Even she could not fully conceal the strain in her posture. Representatives of the Galactic Union, she began, her voice amplified by subtle acoustic technology in the dome. We gather under dire circumstances. The motion before us concerns the continuation or revocation of humanity's standing membership. The charges brought forth are serious, involving violations of conduct in times of war. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the seats. Let it be known that in this hall, we seek truth and unity, yet we will not ignore the gravity of the accusations. Her last words hung heavily in the air. Across the amphitheater, an imposing figure slowly stood. General Vashkroth, a bipedal reptilian alien with folded plates of bone covering his shoulders, inclined his head in a gesture that was equal parts reverence to the High Speaker and defiance toward Mwyrar. His eyes were a deep amber, and each time he spoke, his voice rumbled with an undercurrent of threat. Honored delegates, Croth intoned, let us not mince words. We have allowed humanity into our councils, entrusted them with advanced technology, and let them take part in joint military operations. In every conflict, we have witnessed their methods. Yes, they achieve victory, but at a devastating cost. It is time to consider whether we can afford the presence of such a dangerously unpredictable species. A quiet ripple of assent ran through parts of the chamber. Certain factions, notably the Zakaran, the Zalari, and even a contingent of the Karate, had long harbored deep-seated distrust of humankind's willingness to escalate conflicts beyond what most deemed acceptable. Some of their murmurs reached Mwyrar's ears, words like genocide, uncontrollable, and necessary evil. He stood still, refusing to let his frustration show, even as he noted the sharpened glances from all sides. High Speaker Illerban inclined her head, acknowledging Croth's statement. We have called Chancellor Caden Mwyrar here to answer for these allegations. Let the facts and the historical record guide us. Mwyrar stepped forward, each footstep echoing in the hush. He offered a small, respectful bow. High Speaker, esteemed delegates. Humanity stands before you with open hands, willing to answer whatever charges are laid against us. We do not deny that wars have been fought, that destruction has been wrought. But I ask that each of you remember the context in which these conflicts arose. Silence greeted him. Somewhere near the edge of the hall, a trilobed alien from the Ixin collective clicked its mandibles, perhaps in skepticism. MYRR drew in a breath and continued. If we have acted decisively, even ruthlessly at times, it has always been in defense. Defense of our worlds, our allies, and, yes, sometimes defense of those who turned blind when nightmares crept to their own borders. General Croft let out a low hiss. Rhetoric, Chancellor, will you deny the events that occurred on Zinther Prime? The name Zinther Prime resonated in the chamber like a ghost. Delegates shifted uneasily. MYRR felt the painful twinge of memory, a recollection of official reports and images he wished he could forget. No, MYRR replied, voice taut. I will not deny Zinther Prime. Croft's reptilian lips parted in a grim approximation of a smirk. He lifted a control device, and, at once, a projection materialized above the center dais. It showed a planet's surface, scorched terrain, cities reduced to rubble. The final frames depicted the planet cracking under intense orbital bombardment from a Terran dreadnought. The bombardment was unrelenting. Even after the planet's defenders had been subdued, the bombardment continued. Buildings seized, entire ecosystems gone. In the Great Hall, an audible wave of unease rose. MYRR heard the gasps from the more pacifist delegations. Others stared at him with grim, silent accusation. Croft's voice dipped lower, resonating with smug satisfaction. We have testimony that your fleet commander ordered the planet's surface wiped clean. Why? Because Zinther Prime was believed to house a biological weapons program. You took it upon yourself to decide that no stone or living being be left unturned. MYRR closed his eyes briefly. He recalled the cost in lives, both human and Zintheran. But worse, he remembered the transmissions, the pleas for help from other planets already devastated by the Zintheran crusade. General Croft conveniently omits, he said, meeting the reptilian's amber gaze, that Zinther Prime was the heart of a campaign of conquest that had raised 3 separate star systems in less than a year. He omits that the Zintheran tyrants refused all negotiations. Their intention was total subjugation. If we had not acted decisively, 3 more star systems would have followed in their wake. Yet you destroyed an entire planet, Croft snapped. Why not target only the weapon sites? Why the monstrous overkill? A hush followed. MYRR allowed it to extend just long enough to drive home the severity of the moment. We did what we believed was necessary to stop a genocide that had claimed billions of innocent lives. We eliminated the source of their war machine. Was it a horrifying choice? Yes, it was. But ask yourselves, if we had not done it, how many more worlds would have burned? The Ixin delegate clicked its mandibles again, uncertain. 2 seats away, an avian yelthery ruffled its iridescent feathers, torn between horror at the images and a grudging recognition of their strategic value. High Speaker Illerban observed in silence. You say billions of lives were saved, Croft pressed, yet your solution was to extinguish a civilization. This is the pattern with humanity. Absolute escalation. Before MYRR could respond, a new voice spoke from the gallery. And what of Drain 4? It belonged to a tall, azure-skinned ambassador with a swirling pattern of luminescent lines across their arms. They used a biological agent there, correct? A toxin that spared no one, including civilian populations. A second holographic display flickered on, showing grainy footage of human Marines deploying canisters in the shattered remains of a city. Curling plumes of greenish vapor swept over the rubble, and silhouettes of Xenar soldiers collapsed amidst frantic screams. Croft seized the narrative again. Yes, Drain 4. Another prime example. The Xenar had invaded a human outpost. Humans were outnumbered. So what did they do? They resorted to a barbaric chemical weapon, killing not just the enemy, but everyone in the vicinity. Faces turned toward MYRR. He inhaled, knowing that no matter how valid his explanation, it would not erase the visual horrors. The Xenar had already destroyed our evac ships and were executing hostages, he said. They were about to overrun the bunker where thousands of refugees hid. The local commander requested authorization for an experimental agent to stop the advancing hordes. He was denied, but in desperation, he used it anyway. It was never official Terran policy. We condemned it afterward, stripped him of rank. But yes, it saved hundreds of our civilians. The azure-skinned ambassador's expression tightened and cost thousands of Xenar lives, including non-combatants who couldn't retreat fast enough. A fresh wave of murmurs coursed through the hall. Some delegates spoke quietly among themselves, glancing at MYR with expressions ranging from sympathy to revulsion. Croft's next words struck like a hammer blow. Humanity justifies anything in the name of necessity. So I ask all of you, will we wait until they decide one of our worlds is a worthy sacrifice? Tension coalesced into near certainty for many delegates. MYR stood, fists clenched at his sides, as he struggled to retain composure. He wanted to shout that these were half-truths, that none of these tragedies had occurred in a vacuum. But the Great Hall was no place for raw emotion. He steadied his breath, preparing to deliver a measured response, when the High Speaker's stern voice interjected, halting all conversation. "We have heard enough of the past," Illiban declared. "Let us consider the present crisis." The silver-eyed leader raised a hand, and the holograms vanished. "The motion before us is to debate if humanity shall be stripped of its membership and barred from military collaboration. We have all seen the evidence, heard the arguments." She leaned forward. "We will decide soon. But in the meantime, we must." An urgent chime echoed through the dome, cutting her off. A row of smaller holo displays flashed red with an incoming priority alert. The speaker system crackled to life, and a panicked voice filled the Great Hall. "High Speaker, this is Frontier Post Delta. We are under attack. Unknown ships, technology beyond anything we've recorded. Request immediate." The transmission dissolved into white noise. The final image on the flickering holo feed showed a twisted sprawl of a space station's wreckage. Bulkheads ruptured by blasts of warping energy. Tendrils of black metal seemed to reach out from the surrounding vacuum, clinging to the battered hull. Then the feed died. Not a single delegate spoke. All eyes were on the High Speaker, whose previously dignified posture had tensed with alarm. She pressed a control on her podium, cycling through other distress signals. Post Delta had been a watchtower on the farthest edge of Union territory. A second feed showed glimpses of fractal-like ships, edges shifting as though they were partially out of phase. The station defenders fired in vain. Beams and missiles vanished or spiraled away as if space itself had been bent and redirected. Then came a final, blood-curdling scream from an officer on the station. Silence followed. Ambassador Seraph came, a dark-haired human ally from another sector, leaned forward in evident shock. General Croft, momentarily stripped of his smug composure, stared at the blank holoscreens with wide amber eyes. Whispered questions rippled in every direction. Who are they? What do they want? Could this be a trick? MYR inhaled sharply, analyzing each snippet of data. The patterns of distortion, the abrupt collapses of Union ships. It looked like advanced gravitational or spatial manipulation weaponry, something humanity had only theorized about. He recognized an even more disturbing possibility. If the attackers could bend space, they might also hijack technology, maybe even subvert entire fleets. High Speaker Illiban's voice cut through the confusion. All defense fleets on standby. We must assess the threat level. Croft recovered first, snarling. This is exactly why we cannot trust humanity. They might be behind it or might use it as an excuse. We cannot give them free rein. MYR let the insult go, focusing on the immediate crisis. High Speaker, he said quickly, whatever is out there, it's powerful. Frontier Post Delta was no minor outpost. It was guarded by advanced Union warships. If they fell so quickly, we face a foe that conventional tactics might not deter. We should dispatch reconnaissance teams, mobilize the combined fleets immediately. A handful of delegates agreed, but others hesitated, still suspicious that this might be some elaborate human ruse. Ilerban raised her hand again, silence descending at once. She studied MYRAR. Chancellor, she began, measured. You speak as though you would volunteer Terran forces for the investigation. He nodded, refusing to glance at Croth. We will. At least grant us the chance to confirm what threat is on our doorstep. If nothing else, you know Earth's military can adapt under extreme conditions. A chorus of uneasy agreement emerged. Ambassador Seraph came added. Let them prove their worth. We cannot ignore the possibility that our outer colonies are next. Croth tried to protest, but found fewer supporters now that the immediate threat overshadowed the debate. Reluctantly, the Assembly offered a temporary allowance. Humanity could deploy a task force alongside Union observers. It was not a comfortable partnership. Too many still doubted the Terrans' motives. Yet fear of the unknown attackers proved more urgent than distrust of humanity. The Great Hall descended into an emergency session, with delegates scrambling to coordinate defenses. MYRAR took his leave, stepping off the dais as the swirling lights of the overhead crystal dome dimmed to red, an alert state. He could feel the eyes of friend and foe alike watching him depart. In that moment, it became clear, if humanity failed to stem this new threat, they would be condemned. But if they succeeded, they might earn a grudging acceptance. The stakes had never been higher. Out in the corridor, MYRAR contacted Admiral Avery Gray aboard the TDS. Valiant. The Admiral's voice came through crisp and calm. Chancellor, we're ready to move. Initial scans of Post-Delta's final transmissions show signs of spatial distortion beyond anything we've encountered. That's what concerns me, MYRAR murmured, passing lines of busy staffers. Is the Valiant prepared to deploy stealth scouts? More than ready, Gray affirmed. We'll find out who or what attacked that station. And if it comes to a fight, we'll make certain the Union sees exactly why they still need us. MYRAR allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. All the condemnation and hostility in the Great Hall couldn't change the fact that a lethal new enemy threatened them all. With a final glance back at the dome's distant glow, he strode toward the docking bay, mind churning through the familiar conflict. How far would humanity go to save a galaxy that still viewed them with fear? The next day, a small Terran-led task force, accompanied by observer ships from various Union species, jumped to the far edge of the territory. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel into a scene of devastation, drifting hulks of Union patrol vessels, large tiers along their hulls that glowed with residual energy from the attack. Debris fields floated in silent testament to how quickly the station had been overrun. Admiral Gray, standing on the Valiant's command bridge, surveyed the tactical holomap. Sensors are picking up gravitational anomalies scattered across this region, she said, projecting the data on a large central display. No immediate sign of the attackers, but there's a distortion field near the station remains. It's warping scanning beams, giving us incomplete readings. The Union observers stood in a separate alcove, uneasy. Among them was an amphibious envoy from the Olaris, shifting in nervous pulses of bioluminescence. Could this be a human trick? The envoy asked one of its aides. The aide simply shrugged, wary of saying anything too loud. Gray overheard, but ignored the implication. She keyed a sequence on the panel, dispatching advanced reconnaissance drones that shimmered with disruptor plating, designed to counter a range of scanning interference. The drones shot forward, weaving through debris. On screen, their feeds stuttered as they pierced the anomaly, revealing glimpses of twisted, fractal shapes that glinted with a dark, pulsating sheen. They resembled no standard hull or known design. The drones relayed flickers of data, sporadic energy spikes, temperature readings fluctuating wildly, and a faint sense of movement. One of the Union observers, an avian with shimmering emerald plumage, gasped as the feed showed an organic-like tendril snaking out to ensnare a piece of wreckage. Then the drone feed cut abruptly. The second drone displayed swirling distortions, followed by a deep crack in the hull of the old station, as if invisible hands were twisting the superstructure from within. When the stars, Gray muttered, "They're still here." Before anyone could react, the entire cluster of debris stirred. It was as though an invisible intelligence had decided to converge. Pieces of wreckage began to move in unison, metal scraping against metal, guided by those dark tendrils that emerged from the anomaly. In a single horrifying moment, the station's remains coalesced into a makeshift craft, fusing with unnatural fluidity. A flicker of energy lit up the structure as if it possessed a newly created power core. The Terran tactical officer shouted, "Admiral, we've got a large mass reading off our port bow. It's powering up weapons, some sort of gravitational lance." "Shields up," Gray barked. "All hands, evasive maneuvers." Even as the Valiant banked hard, a beam of warping space tore through the vacuum, twisting the path of a Union frigate that had arrived as part of the observer fleet. One moment the frigate was moving to flank. The next it imploded, crushed by its own gravitational field turned inward. Gasps of shock broke out throughout the Valiant's bridge. Gray steadied herself against the trembling console. "Return fire. Focus on destabilizing that, whatever it is. Target the source of that distortion." Terran weapons flared to life. Railguns fired near-relativistic slugs that glowed with contained plasma. Missiles, designed to confound advanced sensors, corkscrewed toward the mass of fused station wreckage. At the same time, other Union ships joined the fray, though half of them hesitated, uncertain that they wanted to fully coordinate under human leadership. The blast struck home, tearing chunks of reconfigured metal away. For a moment, it seemed as though pure firepower might overwhelm the monstrosity. But then the structure convulsed, reassembling with alarming speed. Energy arcs of deep violet crackled along its surface. In a flash, it extended more tendrils, living metal that latched onto a second Union frigate, swiftly infesting its systems. Within seconds, the frigate's drives powered up. Now it was turning against the rest of the fleet, firing blindly. The Olaris envoy hissed in dismay, while the Terran tactical officer cursed under her breath. Gray's jaw tightened. "They're assimilating our own ships. We can't let that spread." One of the Union observers, an older, scarred Zalari captain, cried out, "That's the vessel of morning light. My sister is on board." Gray's response was ice cold. "Lieutenant, neutralize that frigate before it locks onto us." The Zalari captain roared in protest, but the human gunners had no choice. They unleashed a salvo that tore into the frigate's main reactor. A brilliant explosion consumed it from within, leaving nothing but a fiery swirl of debris. Shocked silence reigned on the bridge. The Zalari captain turned furious eyes on Gray, who swallowed hard and forced herself to remain calm. "I'm sorry," she said, "but if it had fired on us, we'd have lost half the task force." From the corner of her eye, she spotted the Olaris envoy trembling. They do not hesitate to sacrifice their own allies, the envoy whispered to its staff. A fresh barrage from the Valiant hammered the twisted station. This time, the Terrans synchronized high-yield warheads with electromagnetic pulses, aiming to disrupt the creature's gravitational weapon. The pulses crackled across the station's fused plating. A ripple of distortion signaled that the monstrosity's control was faltering. Admiral Gray seized the moment. "All ships, direct your fire at that central node." Now, a combined volley of Terran and Union guns tore the node apart. In a final shudder, the entire fused structure collapsed in on itself, then drifted inert. For a moment, the battered remnants of the task force simply floated, uncertain if the threat was gone. At last, the sensors showed no activity. The immediate crisis abated, yet a grim heaviness settled over every soul who had witnessed the battle. The cost was high. Ships lost, allies destroyed by friendly fire to prevent assimilation, and no guarantee that the enemy would not strike again. Later, aboard the Valiant, MYRR and Gray conferred via hololink with the Union observers. The wreckage had been secured, but answers were scarce. Attempts at scanning the remains revealed no obvious command module or pilot. The structure seemed half organic, half machine, and wholly unknown. Several delegates were clamoring for additional reinforcements and more data. Seraph came, the human-friendly ambassador who had accompanied them, voiced what everyone feared. We have no idea how many of these things are out there. If they can subvert or commandeer ships, they could build an unstoppable fleet from our own vessels. Gray nodded grimly. Precisely why we must spread the word, unify, and find a means to disrupt their ability to manipulate space and infest technology. One of the Union observers turned to MYR. I saw your people destroy that frigate. Your admiral gave the order without hesitation. That cruelty is what we fear. MYR's posture was rigid, and yet we saved the rest of you from assimilation. Sometimes, the only way to save more lives is by making a tragic choice. He let the silence weigh in. If any of you doubt we're fighting for a common cause, I suggest you look out the viewport at the debris. That is what we're up against. When the call ended, tension remained thick. Gray walked over to MYR, her expression stoic. We're never going to convince them we're not monsters, are we? MYR exhaled. They may never understand the lengths we go to in order to protect them. But as long as they fear the alternative more, they'll let us fight. Over the next hours, the battered task force regrouped. Union medical ships arrived to treat the injured, while salvage crews from various races examined the remains of the foe. MYR insisted on transferring crucial intel to the Great Hall so that the rest of the Union would realize the magnitude of the threat. Meanwhile, word of the partial assimilation of Union ships spread fast. The images of Terran ordnance ripping apart Allied vessels would surely fuel more controversy. The next day, an emergency recall summoned the entire Union Council back to the Great Hall. MYR and Gray arrived to find the place teeming with delegates in heated debate. A few openly accused humanity of orchestrating everything. Others demanded immediate mobilization under Terran leadership. High Speaker Illerban tried to maintain order as voices rose and tempers flared. General Croft, regaining his confidence after the shock of the first attack, strode to the center dais and addressed the assembly. We have all witnessed the devastating power of these new invaders. Yet we have also seen how humanity responds, by destroying any ship that stands in their way, even Union ships under partial enemy control. He gestured angrily. Is that what we want? A galaxy under the heel of a species that decides who lives and dies without? A second thought, MYR clenched his jaw but held back. This was not the moment for an outburst. Seraph came interjected. Those ships were lost the moment the infestation took hold. Humanity's swift response likely saved the rest of the fleet. Cross spat, so they say, but we are not children to be saved by barbarians. We must develop a response that doesn't rely on turning ourselves into collateral damage for Terran weapons. Shouts of agreement and dissent reverberated. The High Speaker closed her eyes briefly, then spoke in a voice bolstered by an undercurrent of authority. We cannot ignore the immediate threat. Frontier Post Delta is gone. The Terran-led task force was nearly overwhelmed. We must, at once, unify our fleets and find a solution. And who will lead this unified force? Croft demanded. The humans? So they can continue to wage war on our behalf and claim it is necessary? MYR stepped forward. We will do whatever is required to repel this threat. If that means we coordinate under the Union's command, so be it. But do not expect us to stand idle if you refuse to use every tool at your disposal. Our homeworlds will not be sacrificed for the sake of moral comfort. Silence greeted him. The unspoken implication was clear. Humanity would act as it always had, decisively, even ruthlessly, if it meant survival. Yet the delegates could not dismiss how swiftly the Terran forces had adapted in the previous battle. Some among them had lost entire ships in seconds, uncertain how to respond. Only the Terrans had possessed the presence of mind to target infected allies rather than allow assimilation to spread. High Speaker Illerban's silver eyes fell upon Croft. For now, at least, we must let them fight. Whether we like it or not, they have proven more adept at responding to catastrophic threats than many of our own. General Croth, if you have an alternative plan, speak it now. Croth grimaced, then spoke in a lower tone. We muster the entire Union Armada, of course. We assign oversight committees to ensure the humans don't overstep, and we simultaneously research a method to shut down these abominations without. His voice dripped with scorn, vaporizing everything in sight. An uneasy compromise emerged. The Union would unify its fleets under a central command, nominally headed by High Speaker Illirband's council. Humanity would remain integral to the strategic planning, providing special operations forces and advanced stealth reconnaissance. Croth and others would serve as monitors, ensuring Terran tactics didn't spiral out of control. Or so they thought. Weeks passed in a tense lull. The combined armada gathered near a resource-rich system to refuel and prepare. Terran engineers worked side by side with the Vorkeri, Olaris, and other species to develop experimental phase disruptors that might sever the link between the invaders and any machinery they try to co-opt. The atmosphere of the docking stations was a mixture of grudging collaboration and quiet suspicion. Humans, used to operating on their own, found themselves under constant scrutiny. Soldiers from alien species eyed them warily in the mess halls, remembering what they had seen at Zinther Prime or Drain 4. The humans, for their part, were equally uneasy, feeling the weight of watchful stares whenever they tested a new weapon or loaded up supplies. Admiral Gray strolled through the main hangar, hands clasped behind her back, observing Terra Marines and Olaris scouts loading power cells into a row of sleek dropcraft. She paused to speak with Major Tannic, a Tarsid officer, who nodded curtly when asked about the readiness of the phase disruptors. As soon as Gray turned away, Tannic's expression soured. The delicate alliance was a powder keg of unresolved resentment. Nevertheless, time was short. Fresh sightings of the unknown enemy came from the star system Cassidian Arc. A remote colony had gone silent, and scouts returned with partial footage of vessels that resembled shifting shards of obsidian, each ringed with pulsing gravitational fields. The few transmissions recovered described entire city blocks reconfigured into lumps of fused metal. High Speaker Illirband summoned the Command Council, demanding immediate deployment. So it was that over 1,000 ships from myriad species formed up around Cassidian Arc. The plan: humans would launch a surprise infiltration using advanced stealth ships, sabotage the enemy's ability to manipulate space, and hold them at bay until the main fleet could deliver a coordinated strike. A tall order, but with every species braced for an existential threat, it seemed the only chance. The final jump to Cassidian Arc was fraught with tension. The moment the Armada exited FTL, sensor arrays lit up with frantic signals. The enemy was already there, reconfiguring an entire orbital platform into a monstrous warship. Tendrils of living metal extended from the platform's surface, pulling in cargo. Freighters, personal transports, anything made of alloy, wiring, or engine cores, and bending them into a single mass. Deploy the infiltration teams, Admiral Gray ordered. We need to use the disruptors at close range, or they won't work. Swarms of dropships shot out from the Terran carriers, accompanied by smaller craft from the Olaris and Tarsid. The humans led the charge, punching through waves of gravitational anomalies by weaving unpredictably and launching decoys. The enemy responded with a barrage of warping beams. The casualties began almost immediately. A Tarsid corvette vanished in a twisted implosion of space. Another allied cruiser fired vainly, then found itself partially assimilated, its hull sprouting black metallic growths. Yet the humans pressed forward. On board each Terran dropship, squads of Marines wore exoframes that shielded them from intense gravitational flux. They landed on a half-morphed orbital platform, blazing railgun fire at bulges of living metal. The sound of the fight was like a thunderstorm inside a graveyard. Echoes of twisting metal, sporadic detonations, and the unearthly shrieks of the invaders. Major Jonas Hetfield, leading one Terran squad, hammered a power lance into the fleshy metal surface, injecting an electromagnetic pulse. Nearby Olara scouts tried to assist, but the platform sprouted needle-like protrusions. 3 scouts were impaled instantly. Humans gave covering fire, the marine suits letting them shrug off minor hits. With quick precision, they advanced deeper into the platform to plant the experimental phase disruptors, the only chance to decouple the structure from whatever intelligence was controlling it. All the while, the main fleet engaged. Energy beams flashed in the void, turrets and railguns firing in every direction. The Union command ships sought to maintain formation, but gravitational bursts tore them apart. Delegates on the flagship watched in horror as entire flanks collapsed. Within the Great Hall's distant comm station, High Speaker Illerban listened to patchy reports. She saw new arguments erupt among her staff. The humans are going too far. No, they're the only ones moving effectively. We can't hold position. We have to keep them from destroying everything. More corridors on the orbital platform twisted under the Marines' boots. Hissing clouds of dark vapor vented from newly formed seams. Major Hetfield signaled his second-in-command, a gruff sergeant with half a metal arm. Set the charges and move. We don't have time to confirm who or what's left in these compartments. A Zalari observer who had accompanied them looked aghast. Are you not even checking for survivors? Hetfield barked. Infected compartments, no time. If we fail, we lose the entire station to assimilation, and then the rest of the fleet. Make a choice, Zalari. The observer trembled, but offered no further protest. Charges were placed, and the Marines retreated. Within minutes, the entire section erupted in an EMP wave, and with a terrific surge, the living metal froze, cracking in place. The infiltration teams pressed onward, repeating the procedure across multiple points. Slowly, the monstrous structure began to lose cohesion. Above them, Admiral Gray seized the opening. All vessels, concentrate fire on the structure's center mass. Railgun slugs and antimatter torpedoes hammered into the station, tearing it apart in a chain reaction. The few parts that remained afloat drifted aimlessly, no longer guided by that predatory intelligence. The infiltration teams scrambled back to their dropships, evacuating seconds before the final blast consumed the platform in a dazzling inferno. Cheers erupted on Terran bridges. Observers watched in a daze as the once nightmarish threat fell silent. But not everyone was cheering. A Tarsid monitor group reported catastrophic losses to Allied ships. Thousands of lives lost and countless injuries. Some claimed the Terrans had used them as bait or failed to warn them of new gravitational pockets. The seeds of resentment were sown yet again. In the aftermath, battered ships formed up and debris fields drifted like steel graveyards around the system. For now, the enemy incursion was repelled. A sense of weary triumph mingled with dread. If these attacks kept happening, how long before entire star clusters fell? And how many times would humanity's ruthless efficiency be forced into action? Within hours, the fleet returned to the Great Halls region, bringing wounded delegates and grim news. High Speaker Illerban reconvened the council. Mwybrar attended with Gray by his side, her uniform torn and dusty from the front lines. The chamber was eerily quiet, the once glittering crystal dome now dimmed, as if reflecting the galaxy's sober mood. Croft, battered and wearing bandages across his plated arms, spoke first. Our scouts have confirmed that at least 2 more frontier sectors reported sightings of these invaders. Their ability to appear with minimal warning is a threat to every one of our worlds. His voice, though subdued, still carried that note of defiance. And I must acknowledge, he said through clenched mandibles, that Terran infiltration teams were instrumental in halting the assimilation on Cassidian Arc. A murmur ran through the delegates, many of whom had never heard Croft concede anything about humanity's utility. MYRR's posture remained guarded. He sensed a trap, yet the sincerity in Croft's eyes suggested that perhaps the scale of the new threat overshadowed old grudges. High Speaker Illerban folded her slender hands. Given the results, I propose that humanity's membership be reinstated without the constraints previously considered. In times of crisis, we require swift, decisive measures. Measures that, clearly, the Terrans are willing to take. A flurry of voices rose, some in protest. A karate spokeswoman rasped, but they destroyed 3 allied frigates that might have been saved had we tried to sever the assimilation more carefully. Their overreach cannot go unaddressed. Seraph Kame answered calmly. There was no time to calibrate a safer procedure. The risk of the assimilation spreading was too great. Another representative shouted, "How long before they turn those weapons on one of our worlds if it becomes inconvenient?" That question lingered, capturing the crux of the entire debate. MYRR stepped forward, scanning the faces around him. "We are not butchers. We are survivors, just like each of you. And we have proven that if we face total annihilation, we will make the sacrifices we must. But we do not crave destruction. We do not seek to conquer. Every time we have struck, it was to protect a civilization that might otherwise have fallen." Croft closed his amber eyes, as if wrestling with a decision. Then he gave a slow, reluctant nod. "I hate your methods, human. I fear them. Yet I cannot deny that you might be the only ones equipped to face down these nightmares. If that is the price we pay to live, then so be it." Silence fell. MYR saw the expressions shift around the hall. Grim acceptance, lingering fear, sorrow for the fallen. High Speaker Illerban rose to her full height and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of centuries of leadership. "By my authority, the Terrans are hereby recognized as a fully empowered member race of the Union, with the right to lead defense operations as needed. May we find a better future together, no matter how precarious." No one cheered. It was more like a shared sigh of resignation. Croft turned on his heel and left the chamber without another word. Others followed suit, some in quiet reflection, others anxious to call home worlds that still wept for lost ships. The session ended. In the stillness that followed, MYRR stood near the dais, feeling the bruises of battles both political and literal. He sensed Admiral Gray approach, her gait carrying the fatigue of countless close calls. "We did it," she said softly, "but it doesn't feel like victory." MYRR glanced up at the crystalline dome, the swirling colors subdued in the emergency lighting. "We've only won the right to keep fighting for them," he murmured. "We've proven we can do the impossible, but at a terrible cost. Now the entire Union rests its hopes on us, and if we fail, or if we cross a line they consider unforgivable, we become their enemy." Gray nodded. "That's the burden we've carried for centuries, Chancellor. Earth learned early that survival sometimes demands what others call monstrosities. We found ways to rationalize it, to live with ourselves afterward." MYRR's gaze shifted to the empty seats of the delegates. "Maybe in time, they'll understand. Or maybe not. But we'll keep doing what we must. Because if we don't, who else will?" In the corner, Ambassador Seraph Kame watched them, her eyes reflecting a quiet relief. Despite the heavy toll, she believed that forging an alliance, even a fragile one, was the galaxy's best hope. She stepped forward. "Chancellor, Admiral, the High Speaker requests your presence in a private meeting. No doubt to discuss immediate strategies. Should I let her know you're on your way?" MYR nodded. "Yes. Tell her we'll be there in a moment." As the ambassador left, MYRR took one last look around the hall. Where once had been ornate platforms and carefully arranged decorations, now lay cracked tiles and damaged pillars from the earlier bombardment that had rattled the station. It was a fitting backdrop for the state of the galaxy itself, fractured, battered, but not yet broken. He turned to Admiral Gray, and without further words, they strode toward the exit. Their next battles loomed large, both outside in the cosmic void against unimaginable horrors, and within this hall, where suspicion could still snap alliances like brittle glass. But for now, at least, humanity had secured its place. Once feared, now desperately needed, they would stand as the shield and, if necessary, the sword. It was not glory they sought, nor acceptance. It was survival for all. And so, on that day, in the aftermath of ambushes and assimilation, The leaders of alien worlds found themselves caught in a paradox. Once they had trembled at the mention of Earth, wishing to banish humankind from the galactic stage forever. But the galaxy had grown infinitely more dangerous than any single race's darkest imaginings. In this reality, only the Terrans had proven capable of adapting fast enough, sacrificing enough, to push back the nightmares lurking in the void. The question that remained, unspoken but heavy in every heart, was whether such desperate measures could hold civilization together or simply hasten its final plunge into darkness. Regardless, the final image of that day was burned into the minds of all who witnessed it. A battered Terran admiral, stepping away from the dais while a battered union of species watched in apprehension. In their eyes shimmered a single, conflicted truth. Alien leaders had long feared humanity, and now they could not hope to survive without them.